All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. I've been asked by dozens of people already how in the world it happened that I ended up at the president's house. I'm just going to spend 20 seconds on that. So I don't have to repeat it again and again and again and again. I love your dad jokes. Oh, I need that for my kids. Ah. Last summer, Andy had seen a picture of the chief rabbi of UK, Rabbi Mervis, presenting a book that he had written to the president. It said, like, if he can, why can't I? The horses will just say no. So I sent an email to the secretary. I found out, somehow I got to find out who exactly to send the email to, and responded fairly quickly, like, who are you? What is it you want to present? Give me some backgrounds. I told her about me, told her about the books. She wanted a little bit more information. And we set a date, November 20th. And then came the war. So obviously it was pushed off to the 19th, this Sunday, this week. And I got to say, he was most gracious. He sat, Andy went with me, sat and presented the books, and he asked me questions about the Piyutim. We talked about Amit, we talked about Malay Dumim, we talked about a lot. He even mentions, like, he says that he's like, he loved the little payo. Okay. I offered us, I'll take them off and give them you if you want. But he was, what happened was, as we go through security, and you go from the main room downstairs, you go upstairs right outside his office. There's a little waiting area. So my wife suggested we should be standing. So when he walks in, we're already standing. I said, he's not going to come out himself and get us. 2 seconds later, after I say that, he walks right out, like, Shalom Aleichem. It was right, a beautiful office too. Beautiful. What's the deal with his little beard? I don't know. So like originally I didn't. It's not for Sphere because it was during, there was a time like during the 3 weeks. I know he wasn't shaving, when he was Avelut, he wasn't shaving, but it seems like he's always got this little bit there. Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, yeah. So you know what? That's an idea. If you want, I can just go. Hold on 1 second. Bougie. Yeah, got a question for you. Yeah, we're like this now. Okay, let's focus here. So today we're going to do is finish up one more comment, a couple comments on the last part of Pirke Bet Mishne Hey or Daled, depending on again your division, and which is or Daled or Gimel. It's a possibility, different possibilities. It's the last one of the line of Al Tadin et Chavercha Shetagia Limkomo. We were talking already about the idea you shouldn't judge somebody until you're there in their place. We had a few possibilities of what that meant. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 others this morning before we move on to the next parak. And before we move on to that, I want to answer something Yocheved asked me last week, which will tie back to our beginning of our Jewish history class. So we're going to come back to that in a couple minutes. So the literal meaning, of course, was, Pirke Bet, yes. Oh, you have the wrong volume? Okay. There was one person who used to come to my Navi class years and years and years ago, way before COVID and all, when it was still in my house. And he had used the 2-volume edition of, it wasn't you, 2-volume edition of an English Hebrew translation. And invariably, one was like Shmuel Aleph, one was Shmuel Bet, invariably brought the wrong volume. So, oh well, it could have been you. I don't think so. It sounds like you, but it wasn't. In any case, where was I? So good morning. We're going to start Pirke Avot today. Anyways, so this idea about the general idea is just don't judge anybody. We discussed the resolution between, on the one hand, it says you should judge favorably, and the other hand says don't judge until you're in the person's position. And we talked a little bit about that. But I'm going to give you a couple other possibilities of what this means. And I like both of them, actually. They're not original for me. Sometimes we are in disputes with people. I don't mean, I should better, instead of a dispute, that sounds negative. Like we have a disagreement with somebody. Sometimes they get heated. Sometimes they're just neighbors. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes. So I didn't write down who said this, but one of the things I saw was stop for a minute when you're in a dispute with somebody. Whether it's a debate or it's an actual real argument, just stop for a second. Try to see the other person's position. Doesn't mean you're going to accept it. But before you start, I'm right, and this is the way it's got to be, and this is the way it is, and I'm right. stop for a second. It says, Al tadin et chavercha, don't judge his opinion. Come on, put yourself in his position or her position. And what is it that they're seeing and why are they saying that? And sometimes you'll be swayed, sometimes not. But it's like a bit of advice when you're in a dispute with somebody. I've had it many, many times where it's usually with something I've written as opposed to what I've said. A few times is what I've said, but sometimes I'll write something. I write sometimes online, post a couple things here and there on Facebook. Someone said I should change it to Zev book. I write so much on there. That someone will write me sometimes on Facebook or privately and said, that makes absolutely no sense. You're wrong. And it's almost always never just going to attack on me. Sometimes it is, rarely. I don't mind, but that's called ad hominem. An ad hominem attack is when you attack the person, not the idea. So almost always it's not an ad hominem attack. Once in a while it has been. But when someone says, this makes no sense, or you're wrong about your position, I will actually, and I hadn't seen this before I found this recently, I will actually stop for a second and say, just because I wrote it doesn't mean it's right. Let me rethink this. And there have been posts I've taken down because the person's right, posts I've rewritten to make it clear, and posts that I've said to him, to this person or these people, well, it is what it is. Like you and I disagree. I feel strongly about my opinion, and feel free to post a comment, and we'll never speak to each other again. But that's what the idea of when it comes to a disagreement and an argument. And by the way, that works also when you work with an organization. In many organizations, when there's committees and you're trying to decide things, so some people get a little bit heated and they get a little bit into their opinions, right? And sometimes it's ego. So sometimes you don't want to put yourself in the position of that person's ego, but you do want to put yourself in the position of why are they saying this? Why are they making that comment? Rabbeinu Yonah says something different. Okay, so I'm going to skip Rabbeinu Yonah. Okay. What I do want to mention, though, is on the statement of, there was one more statement in the Mishne I forgot, which was, get it here. Actually, two more. I didn't finish the Mishne. Al tomar davar she'efshar lishmoa, so shesofo lehishamea. Don't say something that you expect that's unclear, but the expectation that someone will understand it on their own. Now, there are different ways to translate. If you want to just tell me one of them, how it's in English by anybody, I'm curious what it says.
Speak that which is not readily heard, but which will ultimately be heard.
Okay, so in other words, don't rely on the fact that people will understand what you're saying. I had a friend who once said, don't give instructions that need to be understood. Give instructions that can't be misunderstood. I thought that was really, really good line. He's been out of a job for about 40 years, but he really has. He's the guy who told me once he likes being unemployed because when he wakes up, he's already on the job. Anyways, so I will tell you something that a different thing Rabbeinu Yonah says about this is that you don't want to say something to a person that's a secret that you absolutely do not want that secret to get put along, so go further. If it's that important to you, unless you need to share the secret because the person can help you or for any other reason, you need to unburden yourself, I'm not talking about to your spouse, I'm talking about to a friend. If it's that kind of a secret that would be detrimental if it got out, zip your lips. He says like this, he reads it like, Rabbeinu reads the words like this. Don't say something that really shouldn't be heard because you don't want people to hear it. It's going to be heard, right? So they say when telling a secret means only tell it to two people, right? They tell the other people and they tell it. Look, I shouldn't say anything. I wasn't supposed to, but listen, I know you're not going to say to anybody else, right? We all been unfortunately in such a situation where we've been the recipient of such a statement or we said such a statement. So really it just means watching your words. There's a pasuk that's in Mishne, I believe it is, that says, it says, the birds will bring yolichet hakol. The bird will bring the voice. What does that mean? When you say in English, the walls have ears, right? The people, you think you're alone sometimes. You don't think people are listening. be very careful with your words because sometimes they're going to come back to bite you. And that's very bad. Another way to interpret this line, don't say something this is the opinion that Barbanel says, don't tell someone, this is a little too tough for you. I don't think you're going to be able to learn this. It's above your head. Because what you're doing is you're imposing your belief system on somebody else as far as their education. You can say, look, this is difficult. You're going to have to break your head over it. But don't say to somebody else who wants to know, oh, this is above your pay grade. This, you want to learn that, but it's going to be too tough for you. Say, look, it's tough. You may not be able to do it now, but hopefully you will be able to do it. It's a great educational lesson, which, by the way, will tie into our next Mishne shortly. It's a great educational lesson because what happens is you tell somebody, and I've seen this time and time again, you tell somebody that, you can not use, oh, you're stupid, you can, God forbid, don't ever say that. But like, look, why don't you just focus on this because you're not going to be able to do that. You have then, especially if it's a teacher who the kids respect, or it's a teacher who that the kids really rely on, you have just implanted in their brain that they have a block, that they cannot do something. Don't tell the kid they can't do something. Don't tell an adult they can't do something when it comes to education. You can explain the difficulty. That's fine. Someone says to me, you know what? I really only know how to read the Chumash. I don't really know Rashi, but tomorrow I'm starting a class in Zohar. Okay. I said, and I've actually had people say that to me, and I give the following mashal. I said, that's good. I think it's a great idea, but I want you to understand what you're doing. You're in third grade. You've learned how to do multiplication and division. Okay, you've learned 2 times 2 is 4, 6 times 6 is 36. And now the next day you want to start integral calculus, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're going to take the basic building blocks of math, and you're going to do something that's much farther down the road in math. You need to build it. I'm not telling you don't do so hard. I'm not telling you don't learn these things, these deeper understanding, but you need to understand that you have to build towards it. That's another idea of where it's going here. The last statement in the Mishnah is self-evident, but I need to do a little bit of expanding. Ve'al tomar, don't say l'ch'efne. He has it nikudot as l'ch'efne. I've heard l'ch'efne. I don't know what your nikudot are. Eshne. Don't say when I'm available, when I'm free, I'll learn. Shema lo tipaneh. Maybe you will not learn. Oh, I'm sorry. As always, we learn Lilu Nishmat Adim Der Chayavra Ben Meir Tzvi Rachalea. Also for Refuah Shlema, Chola Mashmoyot for Meir Dova Cohen Ben Yenta. There's a famous line. It's so famous, I don't remember who said it. That says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Are you all familiar with the story of the science teacher with the mason jar with the stones? Familiar with the story? Yes? No? I'll tell it real quick because some of you already heard this. Famous story. I'm sure it's an allegory. It may have actually happened. A teacher took a mason jar, glass jar, put it on his table, took 2 big stones, put it inside the jar, and asked the class if the jar was full. They said, no, it's not full. So he started adding some small stones. Now he held it up. Is it full? It's not full. He kept adding more little sand. Is it full? And yes, it's full. Everyone agreed it's full. So he says, what's the lesson that we get from this? So one student said, there's always room to do more stuff in life. He says, no. He says, the lesson is if you don't put those 2 big stones in first, you're never going to get them in. You have to understand your priorities. You have to understand what you have to make sure you do, because your day will work around. Let's say someone is very careful to always daven 3 times a day with a minyan. Okay. So they will try to organize their day, whether it's meals or meetings or going to do fun things around times of daven. If someone feels that's important every day that they do, it's not popped in my head to knit something because that's their hobby and it gives them pleasure and joy, and they have maybe a knitting club, then you want to work around that. But if Torah is like, well, when I get to it, what you're saying, it's not part of those 2 big rocks. You're not putting it in your day, and then you won't have the time, because it's not just Shema lo tipaneh. Maybe you're not going to have the time. You won't, because the later the day it gets, the more tired you get. We all know the excuses. I'm the master of excuses, so trust me. I told you I have a doctorate in wasting time, maybe a postdoc even. Interestingly enough, I came up with a thought. I don't know if this really is going to work or not, but I'll share it with you anyways. The word lehit panot, besides meaning to go to the bathroom, it also means to become free, become available. You use the word lifnot to turn, like another 500 meters, turn left. Lemi lifnot, to whom should I turn when I need help? There's a famous piyut at the end of Ne'ilah in Ashkenaz. I think it's in Sfaradi, I forgot. Is ki fana hayom. The day has turned, meaning the day is ending. The sun's setting. Ki fana hayom. But where's the first place this Pei Nun He appears in Torah? Is when Eliezer is telling, it says to Rivka and Yitzchak, and Eliezer is going to find a wife for Yitzchak. He sees Rivka at the well, and all these things are happening, and he's talking to Rivka's father, tells the whole story, and says, "If you'll accept my offer, great." And then he says, "If not," ve'efne al yamin or al smol. I'll turn to the left or right. I mean, I'll leave. I'm going to turn away. I'm going to go somewhere else. The whole topic here is the shidduch, is the match between husband and wife that's in the process. And the first time Pei Nun He shows up is in the context of a match. Jump ahead to the end of Dvarim, and it says in the Zot HaBracha, Hashem misinai ba v'zarach meseir lamo, and it says that Hashem came from Sinai and went out to greet. Rashi says, Rashi says that the imagery of Hashem leaving Har Sinai to greet the Jewish people, to give them his Torah, was like the Chatan coming to greet the Kala, the Shidduch. So the idea is that we have Torah, that we have a shidduch. That's like the ring, so to speak, between us and God. That's the connection. It's the Torah and the mitzvot. So that when we means, don't say, whatever time I'll make a deal, I'll connect to God. It's more than just learning. It's more than that, I think. It means the connection with Hashem. Because most people, I'm assuming, don't go through their day, on an average day, thinking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, God, Hashem this, Hashem. It doesn't happen. There are people like that, but most people. So don't say, well, I'm going to fill in that blank. When I have a time, I'll think about God. I mentioned last week that one of the reasons that Hillel Hazaken said, Al tifosh min hatzibur, which is the beginning of this particular Mishnah we just finished, don't separate yourself from community, had to do with historical reasons. But in his time period, there were that I pronounced it always the Essenes. You've heard it as Essenes, but I've heard it as Essenes on videos. So in either case, this is a group of people that were very much off the derech, as we say, and because they separated themselves from the community, so Hillel was very careful in saying to not separate yourself from community. So the question was asked, who are the Essenes? There are three main groups at this time period. We're talking about about 100 years before destruction of Beit HaMikdash till destruction of Beit HaMikdash, and then a couple of them continue. One of them continues after, and they were the Pharisees, known as the Prushim, the Tzedukim, known in English as the Sadducees, and the Essenes. I don't remember how you say it in Hebrew. I don't remember. Okay, so I'm going to give you brief, because this isn't a Jewish history class, but I'm going to give you just a couple minutes on each, and we'll have a better understanding of Hillel and his Mishnah of saying at the beginning of this Mishnah, which we just finished, Al tifosh min hatzibur. So the Prushim, what we refer to them nowadays as normative religious Jews. Okay, but what really made them stick out more than anything was that they were very, very super makpid, careful about tuman, tahara, ritual purity and impurity, or they came in contact with a bug that was dead, or whatever it might be. So mikvah was a huge part of their lives. You'll find in ancient digs, you'll find very often a lot of mikvaot that were near homes, or sometimes if they're rich in the home itself. They're also very careful about all kinds of mitzvot. They're very medakdek, very, very punctilious in mitzvot. It is from them that rabbinic Judaism is born after destruction of Beit HaMikdash. If you're not sure about some of this, what I'm talking about, just go back and look at some of the early videos I posted on the Jewish history on YouTube. You'll see what I'm talking about. They're very strong in the oral and written law, of being one Torah, one topic, one thing. But keep in mind that this is still the Torah. The Mishne has not been written yet by this point in history. The name Prushim, This is one of your questions also, which means we said, Al tifrosh min hatzibur, don't separate yourself. The word prushim means separated. So what are they separated from? What were these religious, what we call dati Jews, what were they separated from? So it's not clear. There are a couple of possibilities. One, from Amei Haaretz. Amei Haaretz is a term that, and we're going to see this in the next Mishnah, which is why I like this bridge. It really helps. Amei Haaretz at that time period of history did not mean like today. You ever hear the term Amaratzim? It's a bastardization of the word Amei Haaretz. Amei Haaretz mean the people of the land, mean the people who didn't know anything. But at that time, it meant people who were not careful about Trumot and Masrot, Tuman Tara. They wanted to separate themselves from that, so they would be very careful. They wouldn't, eat at each other's homes. They didn't say that they were treif Jews. They didn't demonstrate at Kaplan Street, but they did separate themselves. Another possibility is they were separating themselves from the outside forces of the world. They more kind of turned inward and were less interested in what was going on around them. Again, we think in terms of Jews as like we were the only people around. We were the Hamat, we were the teeniest, and we still are, the tiny nothing. That was the Prushim. The Tzdukim disagreed with the Prushim in many things. I'm just going to actually read to you. This is based on a slide that I used at the beginning of the Jewish history class. I'm just going to read to you real quickly. The difference in the Prushim and Tzdukim. The Prushim believed in the oral law, the literal resurrection of the dead. For those of you in the Jewish history class, we talked last night about the Karaites. So it's also interesting the distance between this. The immortality of the soul, reward and punishment, that angels, malachim, are real. The Beit HaMikdash is good, but sacredness, kedusha, be found in the home. And the concept of free will being bechira chavshit. Again, if you were there last night or you listened to the tape from last night, you'll see that Sadia Gaon's book, Emunot V'Deot, he incorporates all of these ideas in his book of philosophy. But the Tzdukim, on the other hand, now think about modern times, about conservative, Orthodox conservative reform in very general terms. Think conservative now, that the strict adherence to Torah shebichtav, but Torah shebe'al peh was not as important. A person's circumstances in this world are what that person has earned in the eyes of God. The soul dies. There is no afterlife. No reward, no punishment. Angels don't exist, and no temple is not meant to be as part of Judaism. So they're very different. So what about the Essenes? What about them? So they were an offshoot of the Tzdukim. They weren't radical enough. That's why I say you have, again, it's not one for one, but you take, again, very general terms, Orthodox conservative reform, the Orthodox who adhere to Torah mitzvot, Torah shebe'al peh, Torah shebichtav, conservative who changed that and watered it down, especially when it comes to, let's say, Sekadei Chag in Chutz La'aretz and many other halachot, and then the Reform who have reformed Judaism altogether. And then you have humanistic Judaism, which there is no God. God revolves around us, so, whatever that even means. But the Essenes were an offshoot, like I said, the Tzdukim. They had a lot of disputes about Kohen Gadol, who really was the proper Kohen Gadol. But one of the big things that set them apart from everybody else within Judaism was the concept of dualistic dualism, which is like Zoroastrianism, which meant there's a God of good, a God of evil, God of dark, God of light, which is antithetical to Judaism altogether. Yes, not that God controlled good and evil, but that there are two gods, which they were just a little bit off the derech, I would say. So Tzdukim, again, that's also unclear. It could be based on a man named Tzadok, who was one of the first Kohen Gadol. There's another opinion that says that they actually call themselves Tzadikim. And as a name of derision, they say, you're just Tzedukim. They just changed the word. You're not Tzadikim, you're Tzedukim. Okay? So I can't give you clarity on that. Interestingly enough, the name, the Essenes, whatever the Greek name was also, that comes from, even Josephus, whom I imagine you've heard of, probably the classic historian of that time of history, who kind of changed sides a couple of times between the Jews and the Romans. He himself even says it's not clear where the name they got of Essenes, where that came from. Okay, hopefully that helped you and answer the question. Let's take a look at Parak Bet, Mishnah Hey, or Vav. Mine is Hey. Okay, what starts off the words of Hu Haya Omer Ein Bur Yirei Chet. What I'm going to do, like I normally do, is I am going to read and just translate. It starts with the word Hu Hayomer Ein Bor Yirei Chet. See it? Okay. What mission is it in your book? I'm curious. Vav. Okay, mine's Hey. So Hey or Vav. I don't know the history of how they got why Rav Kahati followed a certain pattern. There's different, I guess, different versions of the breakdown of the Mishnah, but it's still the same words. Okay, I'm going to read and translate, then we're going to go back and pick up some of these meanings. Hillel HaZaken used to say, Ein bor yirei chet. I'm going to give just a simple translation now because there's a lot of meanings to some of these words. I'm just going to say how do you say simpleton, a vacuous, and what does your English say? Boor. Yeah, Boor, right? Yeah, because that's the word in English, right? Rude. Rude doesn't fit though. It does in modern Hebrew it would fit, but not in this context because someone's rude doesn't mean they're not going to be able to yirei. So okay, I hear what you're saying. So ein bor yirei, the person who is a boor, Boor, cannot live his life in fear of doing a sin. And a person who's an amaretz, again, that will require definition, cannot be a chassid, meaning he could be a person who's yirei, he's afraid to sin, but he can't achieve to be the level of a chassid. V'lo baishan lamed, and a baishan, a person who's embarrassed to ask questions, will never be able to learn. V'lo kapdan melamed, and someone who's exceedingly strict should not be a teacher. They need to put that up in many schools on the walls of many schools. And not everyone who happens to be very active in business will get smart. How does that fit in this Mishnah? This is a very well-known phrase also, that when there's a lack of people, try to be a person. Okay, what does that mean? We have a lot of stuff to talk about, obviously. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, where it says, Ein bor yirei chet. So let's make a distinction first between bor and am haaretz. I also want to read, if I have it here. Yeah, I'll read this in a minute. That a bor, in the classic term here at the time of the Mishnah, meant had no education and no real job. We would say that a bum, someone who never went to school, didn't know anything, kind of just hung out the street, streets drinking, whatever. Okay, that's a bor. That kind of person cannot be yirei. What does it mean to be yirei? Literally means to fear sinning. Now, let's say I'm going to make up a rule. Okay, let's say that on Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock every week, you're not allowed to cross the street from the west side to the east side of the street. But you don't know that. Are you going to be afraid to do that and make that mistake? No, you don't know. So multiply that by 613 times whatever, and you don't know any of these things. So what are you going to be afraid of doing anything wrong? You don't know anything. So bor cannot be yirei. It can't get to that point. And what is ignorance is bliss? By the way, let me tell you something. When I was in the shul in Chicago, I started the very first week to do the following. And I did it for 540 weeks in a row, which was to post on the wall in the shul, and then eventually I made books out of it, what I call the halacha tip. It was a short, not even full page, something maybe people don't know, with a footnote where it came from. And people really liked them, and I would email them, and at the end of the year, I printed them up and gave their family a copy. One day, maybe I'll make it the book. But then ahead, sometimes people would see the title, and they would say, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And the truth is that if they're going to read it and not follow it, better they shouldn't be. Toshi Shogigim, better they should be doing it by accident than doing it on purpose. Okay. So in any case, so bor cannot be yirei. Now, what does it mean, am haaretz? It says am haaretz is a person who may know a lot of stuff. They may have learned. Again, we're talking about that time period of history, but will lack a real education. They're aware, they keep their eyes and ears open. They know stuff, but not enough of the good education. They know basic things. So first, I want to read something to you from Rav Steinsaltz itself of what is the explanation of am haaretz. Make this so I can actually see it. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Hamunach am haaretz kibel im hashanim migvan gadol shel mashma'uyot. The phrase am haaretz has had various explanations. What does it really mean over the last few centuries? B'mikra, hinui ze mityaches liyashvim ba'aretz. When you talk about Tanakh, the word am haaretz doesn't mean a bor, or doesn't mean a simpleton or a person who doesn't have an education. It just means people that live there. And he quotes some psukim. B'sifruta tanait. When you're talking about this time period, the time period of the Mishnah, for example, Amaretz hu kvar kinuya shel kfutza chevratit shelo shemra kol hamitzvot. Now you're talking, he says, at the time period of the Mishnah, it's a time period where people were described as Am Haaretz. They didn't really know a lot of Torah or keep a lot of mitzvot. This comes back to what we said before. It also referred to those people who were not careful about tuman tahara, ritual purity and impurity, and neither on trumot and masrot, which we just described before as the tzdukim. Okay, so they would be considered according to this definition, Amei Haaretz. But then when you come further in history to the time of the Gemara, this time period after the Mishnah, now it says shimush b'kinui amaretz b'migvan tzurot. There are all different types of meanings there. So no longer does it have one single meaning. But rather just a general negative outlook of such a person. So that's how he just explains the word, the phrase amar. So a bor cannot be yirechet because again he doesn't have the knowledge of what to be afraid of, and therefore because he doesn't have to be a knowledge of afraid of, he'll do all kinds of sins. On the other hand, an amaretz cannot be a chassid. What does that mean? A person who knows, has some general knowledge, can only get to a certain point. Maybe he can end up doing a lot of the mitzvot, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. But to be a chassid, not necessarily talking about Rabbeinu Yonah's explanation, Ramchal's explanation in this Sharim. We're talking just in the colloquial pious individual. He's not going to excel in Torah mitzvot, so he can't get to that level. Why? He's lacking the education. Doesn't mean he can't get educated and become a chassid. But a person who stays in the situation of an Am Haaretz, who doesn't have an education or has a minimal education and says, that's enough for me, cannot become a chassid. And just as an aside, the word yirechet and chassid have two different connotations. Yirechet is something passive, right? Because yirechet means you don't do something. I don't work on Shabbat. I don't, and chassid means is the proactive, is that you not only don't do averot, but you're very careful in doing mitzvot. Yes.
At the time, most people were in an agricultural society. They had minimal learning.
Yes.
But I say Klushan have sort of invalidated these Amei Haaretz, because they don't separate Truma and Masrot. And
right. So what should they have done? They should have been educators, right? They should have educated them. So that was the job of the Kohanim. The job of the Kohanim in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, because there were just X amount of jobs in the Beit HaMikdash on a daily basis, and it was usually done by Goral, by lottery. But the main job of the Kohanim was to be the teachers and the educators. So at that time, by this point already in history, before the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash, the Tzdukim had really much taken over the Beit HaMikdash. And they called themselves, they were the, even though some of them were not. They're the Kohanim, they're the ones in charge. Again, Alexander Haig, I'm in charge now. So you're right. It sounds like they wrote them off. Now, I can't tell you, did they make an attempt to try to bridge that? I don't know. I have to look into that. But it gives us the step to the next line in the Mishnah, this perfect lead-in. Because the first part of the Mishnah tells us, look, if you're like this, you can't accomplish this. If you're like this, you can't accomplish this. Now, you want to learn. You want to get out of being an Am Haaretz or a bur? Okay, very good. So you go to learn. It could be by a teacher. It could be in the school. It could be, we'd say nowadays, online. But then you put yourself in a problem situation if you have a certain personality. Now, before I explain that, let's go back one more step. The Gemara and the Midrash and many places talk about there are three classic identifiers of a person who's Jewish. They are Rachmanim, merciful, Baishanim, I'll explain what that means in a minute, and Gomlei Chasadim, they do chesed. What is Baishanim? So people sometimes say they're embarrassed. What does it mean they're embarrassed? It means they're people who understand what privacy is and private and keeping things private. You don't have the locker room talk, guys going into locker room talking about their conquests in bed. Okay, it doesn't. That's who we are. We're Baishanim. So wait a minute. So Baishan's good to be a Baishan. So what does it mean now in this Mishnah? The next line, Lo Baishan Lomed, that an embarrassed person can't learn. So I'll explain to you. It's not the same Baishan. It means as a person is afraid to ask a question because they're afraid of looking stupid. They're afraid of making a fool of themselves. They think that, everybody else must know, so I must be the one who's dense. And therefore, if you're afraid to ask, you won't grow. You won't learn. You should never, ever be afraid If I'm teaching something and I use a phrase and I try my best to assume people don't always know what the phrases mean, so I try to explain. But if I don't explain it, right? And everyone's sitting here saying, maybe one person says, so I have no idea what that is. He keeps saying it, but I'm a little shy to ask. When half the people sitting there are thinking the exact same thing. Finally, when someone says, what does it mean? I've had it happen a couple times. And then get a bunch of people going like, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I said, oh, I'm really sorry. And I'll back up and I'll re-explain now with that explanation, with the translation. So to be a Baishan prevents growth. To be that kind of Baishan that you're afraid to ask. Don't ever be afraid to ask a question. Even if it means you're going to ask a question and you'll feel intimidated by someone, you're by the president of the country, or you're intimidated because this guy's, oh, he's such a gadol, I'll never be able to ask him a question. What makes that kind of a person a gadol is that you can approach them, you can ask them questions, and that helps you. Because otherwise, what happens is it says v'lo haaretz chasid, right? A person who's haaretz cannot be a chasid, and a bur cannot be a rechet. Well, how do you get out of that situation? You learn. Well, I'm afraid to ask. If I'm afraid to ask, I stay in my situation. I'm still a bur. I'm still an haaretz. Right? Imagine someone takes my tape today and cuts those words out. I'm a board, I'm an amaris. Okay. Is different. It's not. Means the kid doesn't even know what to ask. It's not that they're afraid, they just don't know what to ask. So yeah, it's a different situation. So don't ever be afraid to ask a question. We can learn that from Rabbi Akiva, actually. We're coming up on Lag BaOmer. Rabbi Akiva, we all know the story that until he was 40 years old, was a boor. He had no education, didn't know anything. And he saw the drop of water hitting the stone and made an indentation into it. So if the water can do that to stone, then something can beat me. And Kita Aleph, he goes into Kita Aleph at 40 years old, learns Aleph Bet, becomes one of the greatest teachers of history of the Jewish people. I saw something recently in last week's one of the Parsha sheets last week. Blew me away. I held on to it. I need to use it and develop it somewhere. It says that, the reason that we have this time of Sviat Omer is a sad time because the 24,000 students, the 12,000 pairs did not lo nahagu kavod zeh bazeh. They didn't respect each other. The famous question, of course, being Rabbi Akiva, who's the big guy of the V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, is that klal gadol b'Torah, that you should love your neighbor like yourself, and that's one of the greatest things. How is that his students didn't follow that? So I came across was that we were completely misunderstanding. It's not that they didn't respect each other. It's that this was the time, remember, this is the time period of Mered Bar Kokhba. This is the time period, 135, the Common Era, where there's a final rebellion against the Roman government. And Bar Kokhba is the one who was leading the charge. Rabbi Akiva was for him, said he thought he was Mashiach, Darach Kochav Mi'akov, but he felt that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. And his own students disagreed within themselves. He's right. He is the Mashiach. We shouldn't be fighting. This is the proper merit. The other ones did. So it's not only they disagreed to the point where they didn't respect each other at all. And the whole thing blew up in their face. And eventually, of course, the rebellion falls apart and all kinds of bad things happen to the Jewish people as a result. So it's much more than that, but I just thought that was an interesting idea. So on the one hand, you have a teacher-student relationship. On the one hand, you have the student has a responsibility to listen, to learn, to ask, and never stop asking. The other hand, the teacher has a responsibility to teach. But then it says, Lo hakapdan melamed, that a kapdan, someone who's exceedingly strict, should not be a teacher. Now, what about those days when I did have a teacher, hit the hand, like that, never with a ruler. It was always the hand. I did have one event. I was in fourth grade. All these things make an impression on you. Fourth grade, I might have told you the story. I had a teacher who liked to hit kids. And that time, by the way, as we know, it was perfectly normal. So he hit me once. I don't remember why. And I went home and told my dad. Dad came to school the next day. Called the teacher out of the class. Now, as kids, teachers are God. Right? Not anymore. They don't. So he called the teacher out, and I heard him say, almost bezeh touch my child again, I will kill you. He never hit me again. I don't remember. I didn't like him as a teacher. I had some fabulous teachers, absolutely fabulous teachers. I had a few really terrible ones, one horrific one, a couple lousy ones. But I think in general terms, from the time I was in kindergarten until I finished college, I'd say the majority of my teachers are good or very good. I did have some lousy ones. We all do. It's just, whether it's a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer, a teacher, you have some good ones and some that aren't so good. So, but I was okay to have some very good ones. And by the way, even from terrible teachers, you can learn a lot. You learn a lot what not to do. So lo hakatan melamed. If I'm the teacher and I'm super strict, okay, stand up, say your multiplication table is 37 times. If you even think to look out the window while you're doing it, you got to start over again. The kids, what happens as a result? Not just fear, anxiety, illness sometimes, literal illness. And what does it lead back one step to? Lo habaishan lamed. A person who's embarrassed to ask won't learn. Why are they embarrassed? Because they're going to raise their hand. I don't understand. What do you mean understand? I've explained it 37 times. The job of the teacher is to explain it 100 times if necessary, as long as the kid is participating. Kid doesn't participate, like they're talking or they're wandering away. The teacher doesn't have that responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, to try to get that kid to understand. When they want to participate, that's fine. I've told students that I've learned with over the years, and especially privately, that explain something they don't understand. They'll apologize. Look, I'm sorry, I don't get it. I said, I don't care. I'm not here. It's not about me. It's about you. You need to understand this. I said, I'll explain it 100 times. She said, well, I'll be bored. I said, yes, you will be bored. I'll be bored. But the goal is that you have to understand. So therefore, the flip side, of course, is that a Rahman, someone wants to feel for their student, wants to be there for their student. That's the person you want. So I've had, like I say, I've had so many good role models in education. And by the way, where I work at Amit, lots of those teachers fall into that category. I don't know of a single kapdan there. I have a lot of good ones there too. Not everybody, Baruch Hashem, but everyone's getting there. They're growing. Tov. Okay, we're going to stop here. We have still other things like what does it mean about business? What does it have to do at all with this particular chapter? And especially the last line of the Bimkom Shein Ish, when there's a man or a person, try to be a person. We'll have to talk about that next week. Bezrat Hashem. Have a great day. Godspeed.